Good evening, and thank you for allowing us to spend some time with you this evening to talk about the highest and best use study that we've been working on for quite a few months now. We started this process, really we got started in full swing about April or May of last year. So it's been almost 12 months, and we've spent a lot of time taking a look at what the opportunities might be. And tonight I want to walk through with you what they are and some areas to concentrate on and some areas that you'd probably need some more time for that to come to fruition as far as development. If you'll open your packet, you have two things. You have a copy of the presentation I'm going to go through tonight. You also have an executive summary of the larger study that is with the city, and then you have another small piece behind that that we'll get to closer to the end of the presentation. So this is the piece we'll be going through this evening. Our agenda, we're going to start with a brief introduction on exactly what the study encompasses, then what the study methodology was, how did we get to this point, and what were we trying to accomplish. The property overview, you can't do a study on highest and best use without understanding the property characteristics. We'll look at demographics, which are a huge driver from a growth perspective as to where opportunities may lie. We'll briefly just take a look at the top employers in the city. Then we'll go through a series of area demands that we reviewed and some conclusions. So just to kick us off, this is a broad-based study. So there's lots of different types of studies that you can do. Some can be deep dives in a specific area. This one is more broad-based, and that's because at the high level there was not an indicator sending us in a specific direction where we would deep dive into a specific use that we thought this is just the one. So this is a broader based look at what different types of uses would or would not work on the site. And as we were looking at this, the considerations, your site is quite large, as you know, and as a result it would be really good to have an anchor, something of critical mass that around which other things can be built. So looking for an anchor was one of the things we set out to do. Compatibility among uses clearly is key. However, you have some bifurcation in your site that would allow us to veer from that a little bit, and we'll talk about that as well. The existing physical property conditions, what do those allow and disallow or encourage from a development perspective? Where does this site fit within the city, and where does this site fit within the region as far as its location and whether it's a driver for certain types of development or not? And then last but not least, again, demographics really will help us to drive what growth may exist, may not exist in different areas, and what does that mean to us from an opportunity standpoint. The methodology we used in the study was pretty broad. Again, we started with a review of the site conditions, and I'll go through most of this in more detail as we go forward. But we looked at the site conditions. Once again, the property characteristics tend to drive some of the areas of opportunity. The city provided me with various pieces of information from the assessor's office, the building department, really the DDA. I put together a list of information that I'd like to have as kind of a jumping off point, and the city was very kind to bring that forward for me to review. We held stakeholder meetings, a series of stakeholder meetings with top employers in the area as well as city stakeholders, and we'll go into a little bit about what that entailed. Actually, I may hit some of that now. I think that might be helpful for you to know exactly where we went with that. We held 4 or 5 of these over the first few months that we were doing the study. We had major employers, city leaders, the Chippewa-Saginaw Indian Tribe representatives were at one, the Chamber of Commerce, Community Foundation, Convention and Visitors Bureau, Middle Michigan Development Corporation. So we had lots of different participants to help us identify where there might be opportunities, where there might be gaps in services or products that you could use every day that you don't now have at your disposal, We also looked for major employers to give us some insight as to what their growth plans were. Did they see themselves expanding over the next 5 years? Did they see themselves contracting? What were their growth plans to the extent that they were able to share those with us? We also were trying to figure out from the stakeholders what are their perceptions of what should go on this site. So we were not only looking for where there might be gaps that they could identify, but were there areas in which they thought something would be perfect or things that they actually thought we should stay away from. So just giving us, especially since I'm not local to your city, some insights into pros and cons of the site from their perspective. So that's primarily what we covered there. And then you'll notice under the study methodology, we also have specialists. Certainly within CBRE, we have many specialists in all areas of commercial real estate. So I was dealing with our housing specialist, I was dealing with our commercial real estate, retail, office. So pulling all of that expertise into evaluating what the opportunities might be. And then we reached into interviews with local and regional and national developers. So taking a look in specific areas, we actually went out to the development community for specific uses to see if there was an interest and what might be some pros and cons from their perspective to encouraging them to come to this market. Demographics, I'll hit that later in more detail, but then we start to look at, as you take a look at this, we started to look at office, we looked at retail from a four-county and a local perspective. We looked at several types of multifamily housing. We looked at a hotel convention at a very high level. Would that have some appeal there? And we looked at a high-level review of single-family housing as an opportunity. Now, why did we come up with these as the areas to concentrate? Primarily, they came from our stakeholder interviews. So those interviews directed us in certain areas. That's why I say this is a very broad type of analysis as opposed to dwelling in one specific area. So what do you know about your property? I'm not going to tell you all the nuts and bolts because you live here and I don't, so you probably know much more about it than I do. But things that are important for you to know: when you bought the property, it was over 300 acres. However, the amount that's developable, we believe, is around 275 acres. Now, why is it less than what you bought? Well, for one thing, you'll see that there's an area where the tribe owns a piece of, bought a parcel from the state as well, and that parcel was rounded out to include some additional buildings. So that parcel is now just under 14 acres of the total site. Also, right through there are wetlands and there's a floodplain. That takes up almost 24 acres of your site. Is that a bad thing? You've got a site large enough that to develop it all is going to take a number of years anyway, so I don't see it as a detriment. And I think in some respects it provides a positive, because now you have a natural barrier from the north side to the south side, which allows you from a compatibility standpoint of the uses you're looking at to get a little bit more disparate than if they were going to bump up against each other. So we would see that there would be crossover between the two, that you wouldn't have a total separation where you couldn't reach one side from the other. But at the same time, it does give you some advantages with such a large parcel and having this natural barrier to encourage some types of development that wouldn't necessarily sit side by side under other conditions. The property has 21 buildings currently. Of course, it was the former Center for Individuals with Developmental Disabilities. And those 21 facilities make up roughly 500,000 square feet. Those buildings are not architecturally significant. They're not on the National Historic Register. They are not in condition where you could reuse them at all. You may be aware that there's some environmental conditions that the city's dealing with and is part of our team's work. So there is there is no value in keeping those buildings from my perspective as a former developer. So I think the site does need to be scraped in order to make it developable for the future uses. It's zoned agricultural, but the city is undergoing an update to its master plan today, and taking into account what types of uses might be compatible here, we've already discussed with the city is something that you're willing to do. I think it's really important, because this will be a long-range development, that you leave a lot of flexibility in your zoning, not tie yourselves down to something that discourages developers from coming to the table. So I think building a master plan that you can work toward is important, but that it has some flexibility, because demand will expand and contract over time, and tightening your zoning to the point that you make it, that you discourage developers is I don't think the right way to go. So I think it's important to set parameters with the outliers, so that you don't get something in there that you really don't want, but provide yourself some flexibility so that uses can expand and contract as demand develops over time. So what are your demographics? Do you know? Your population from 2000 to 2012 was flat. Basically, you had almost no growth. For most of Michigan that was seeing a lot of loss in population, actually you did quite well. I'm from the Metro Detroit area, and I can tell you a lot of cities were losing a lot of population associated with the auto industry. You're somewhat, you don't really rely on the auto industry as your main industry here, so you've been able to withstand the recessionary pressures without losing a lot of population. On the other hand, over the next 5 years, your population growth is expected to be less than 50 people. That's what, based on information from the U.S. Census. So based on that very limited population growth, it impacts the degree to which developers will be interested in the site. And demographics drive almost every type of use, whether it's retail, office, industrial. So it's really important that we understand what the demographics are telling us. Household units are another measure of demographics. So while, and I'm really basing myself on this chart right now, household units are those occupied, right? And while your population stayed almost flat, your household units dropped by 134 from 2000 to 2012. So you lost that many households. Doesn't mean that's not a physical measure of buildings, that's a measure of people living in homes. And households are both renters and owners. So because you're a heavy rental population, obviously that can impact the fluctuation in that number. Over the next 5 years, you're expected to grow by about 3 households a year. Once again, it's not a big driver for certain types of uses with that limited amount of growth expectation. If you look at the center of the chart, right here, we started to look at what is affecting your housing as it relates to your demographics. So just to take a look at from your own building department, from 2000 to 2006, you averaged 36 new starts a year, new construction permits. From 2007 to 2012, you averaged 14 a year. So considerably less from 2006 to 2012. Now, that's not really a big surprise because we have been in a recession for quite a long time. And in the single year of 2012, you had 7 building permits issued, of which 3 were single-family homes. So that's even half of what your average was from 2006 to 2012. Then when you look at your housing supply, you currently have almost 9,000 housing units. Now, those are properties. Those are a combination of single-family homes, condominiums, and rental units. So your total housing unit supply is almost 9,000. The total household units that are in occupancy are 8,315, once again right here. So between the units, which are the physical structures, the housing units versus the household units, and I'm sorry that this gets technical and might be confusing. So your housing units are the physical structures, your household units are the occupancy of those structures. So you have almost 9,000 physical structures. Once again, that includes apartments and single family and condominium. And then occupied among those household units, your household units are 8,300. So that means you have about 600 units that are unoccupied, or roughly a 7% vacancy rate. That's not a huge vacancy rate, but it also doesn't say that there's high demand to necessarily come forward with more housing. Then we looked at your housing, your owner-occupied housing. So breaking down your total household units, which once again includes rental and owned, and breaking that down to your owner-occupied, which we would assume are falling into the single-family and condo categories. You have roughly 2,709 of those out of a total number of units of 8,921. So that tells you your ratio of rental versus owned properties. So you have those number of owner units, and per the Central Michigan Association of Realtors, they shared with us that your average number of sales in a year over the last 3 years has been 225. And that's roughly a 10% turnover in your owned single-family or condo units annually. And that's really quite healthy. So that means that you have a fair amount of trading going on. So while your population's not trading, your housing units are rolling over. Because clearly the population not growing doesn't mean no one's moving in. It may mean people are moving in and people are moving out, right? So therefore, you are having some trading in your supply, but it does indicate that you have about 10% moving every year, so you have ample amount of movement. So the people who are here stay for a long time, but they don't stay so long that you have nothing turning over, so that there's no supply for anybody who wants to buy a new home. So those are some conclusions. And then just on the right, just information for purposes of understanding who would be the population at which there might be demand. Your median household income is $28,488, and your median owner-occupied house is $114,000 is its value. Now, median, of course, is different than average. So median means that half of the incomes are above that and half of the incomes are below that. It's not an average. It tells you where the middle is. Same thing with your homes. So the middle of your home values is $114,000. And I do have backup information if the council, the commissioners, or the planning commission would like that breaks that down as to how that is made up as to how many units fit into each category. Now also demographically, and I promise to get on to things that you might find more interesting, but, and this chart is a little hard to read. It looks better on my screen. Unfortunately, it looks kind of grayed out there, faded out. But really, here we're looking at what's the composition of the labor market and the housing market. So the first two deal with housing, and we've covered this a little bit, but a household unit is a family and non-family unit are both combined to get household units. That's where your renters come in versus, your traditional family units. And so your 60% non-family units, which speaks to your student population, and your 40% in your family, and these are rounded a little bit off of the exact numbers. As far as your owner-occupied versus your renter, we just looked at that. the building that's now under construction and the expansion that's already zoned and approved for that, they could get up to 15 or 18,000 square feet. So that could equalize and bring you back into about a 12% vacancy rate. So I think that the area where we saw the opportunity is now being met already on Mission Street. There are some other reasons why at the Mount Pleasant Center site that you could see some medical office space later, but it would be highly dependent on an anchor going to that space. When we looked at institutional and corporate, once again, because of your dominance in the healthcare sector, and CMU, we did have discussions with Central Michigan University. They have, as you know, a significant amount of land mass, and they felt like they had ample supply of land that they would not see themselves developing anything at Mount Pleasant Center. The proximity doesn't necessarily work for them, and they don't really need additional space. As you know, they have the research park as well, so they have pad-ready sites for development that would be tangential and supportive of their mission. So Central Michigan wasn't really a candidate for necessarily putting any of their uses over on the Mount Pleasant Center site. McLaren and Mid-Michigan, I can't say that we have a clear indication of exactly where those might fit in. McLaren, of course, is landlocked in its current location. They are not able to expand where they are, and so we believe that at some point in the future there could be an opportunity. Now, this is not a decision coming from McLaren to me. This is me looking at the market and saying, where are there opportunities based on what I see in the market? So McLaren is landlocked, and it is a growing healthcare system within not only your area, but throughout the southeast Michigan. So if there's an area to concentrate on, we would recommend that you continue or consider discussions with them as to what they might be intending as they go forward. Mid-Michigan Health just created an alliance with University of Michigan, as I'm sure you're aware, last year. The University of Michigan is expanding in many, many areas of R&D, research and development, technology. So University of Michigan, as a partner with Mid-Michigan Health, once again, our recommendation would be that you have meetings with them and talk to them about what they're doing with University of Michigan. And of course, I read that there is I believe it's a cancer center that they're looking at in Midland, and of course that's where they're based. But University of Michigan has many areas of expansion that they're looking at in many places, and so we felt like it was worthy of a discussion to find out if, as the University of Michigan relationship and partnership grows with them, make this site available to them from a healthcare perspective. We are not ignorant to the fact that McLaren may see great competition in Mid-Michigan, and Mid-Michigan may see great competition in McLaren. I'm not here to settle that, and nor is that something that I think needs to be a negative. I think to the extent that you have two growing and positive healthcare systems, I mean, I'm in the real estate business. I go after both of them and see, who might have something that might be viable for your site. So I think that is worthy of consideration. Traditional retail. Traditional retail is your all of your shops where you do your traditional shopping, whether it's grocery, clothing, automobiles, and I have a non-traditional retail coming up, which is why I've named this traditional retail. Basically, we did quite an extensive study on the retail in your market, and we divided it into two markets. One is a primary trade area, and these are just industry terms. The primary trade area in this case is within the confines of the city of Mount Pleasant. Then we looked at a secondary trade area because there is a certain amount of population outside of the city that naturally comes to the city, or you go outside to do some shopping because of your size. So the secondary trade area is Clare County, Midland County, Gratiot County, and Isabella County. So those were the four counties deemed to be within a secondary trade area from which the study would take a look. I'm going to just move some of my notes here. So once again, what we're trying to do is determine, is there demand, and if there is demand within retail, what is that demand for? There's a, in the retail business, the consumer spending habits and the consumer shopping habits are the drivers behind what retail is located where. And so there's something called a PRISM segmentation study that is a sub-component of our overall retail study. I'm sure the administration can provide you with additional details on that. But a PRISM segmentation, in this case, is a collaboration between the Nielsen Company and CBRE, where we take a look at the spending habits in 66 different segments. And these segments are based on different groupings from the very wealthy and the very educated to the impoverished and the uneducated and everything in between. So there's 66 categories of retail, and this isn't for determining who's smart, who's not smart, who's rich, who's not rich. It really has nothing to do with that. It's really determining of a population type, what are the segments and what are their spending habits within that population. And from there, where does that, what are the retail preferences for that population, and from there, what are the stores that meet that, that preference for where you want to shop? And do you have enough of that? So it's about 50 pages in the report or longer, so it's not something where somebody pushes a magic wand and says, you know, this is what we think about retail. So we took all 66 segments, they broke down where does Mount Pleasant fit within that. And then they break it into further groups called social groups and lifestyle groups. And so those are different combinations of the segments for purposes of determining the spending habits. The bottom line is, we looked at what your spending habits are, and this is looking at your dominant segments. This is looking at the majority of your population. So if it doesn't represent you in this room, it doesn't mean anything other than you probably are a little bit more in the minority in your spending habits than the dominant segments. But basically, within those dominant segments, your buying habits and spending habits are right in line with the retailers that you have today. So there is not a real demand for a significant amount of retail outside of the majority of the stores that you have. Now, what does that mean? That means that there is a segment of the population that does want to shop somewhere else, and in all likelihood they're going to Lansing or to Grand Rapids, or they're buying it online. And today, with internet sales being so significant, every retailer is not conscious but super conscious of the ability for either them to sell it to you via the internet, which saves them the bricks and mortar of building in your community, or that you're going to find it somewhere else because your opportunities on the internet for finding goods and services are basically unlimited. I mean, you can buy from anywhere in the world, right? So it gives pause to retailers about whether they should spend money on brick and mortar. And so the retail business all across the board is going through a metamorphosis of trying to figure out what they're going to be. The retail sector was hit harder than any other sector of our society as it comes to the, from a market perspective when it comes to the recession. And they still haven't recovered. So I just put up here some retailers' considerations as they say, where am I going to spend my dollars on brick and mortar that would cause me to go to Mount Pleasant or Metro Detroit or California and, you know, San Francisco. So they're looking for the same thing everywhere, obviously scaled to the size of the community. So the things that they're looking at are the national and the local economy. As we've just discussed from a demographic standpoint, you're not expecting any growth in a material way. That lack of growth doesn't encourage a new retailer to move to your market. The national economy, once again for retailers, has been very tough. Some retailers are hanging on. I just saw in Metro Detroit recently that Best Buy is now combining with Gardner White Furniture to save money, because Best Buy is having a very difficult time making it on their own, because everything you can buy at Best Buy, you can buy at Walmart, and you can buy in a lot of other places. So shops that have have a narrow product line have more difficulty right now than those who have a very diverse product line. And so the stores that you have, Walmart, Kmart, JCPenney, Target, those stores are doing better than those who carry a very narrow line of product. Population, we just mentioned that. You don't have any significant population growth anticipated over the next 5 years. So, you know, if we could tell a retailer, you know, you're going to jump by 50% in your population, you know, I don't think there'd be many places in the United States that would have that, to be perfectly honest. So you're not abnormal in that. But it doesn't encourage new retailers to come that would give you a different product than you have today. Once again, the internet sales are changing how retailers look at where they spend their dollars on brick and mortar stores. The consumer spending habits, as we discussed, the dominant segments of your population, your needs are being met within the stores that exist today based on the analysis that we did. What's the supply of competing retailers? So if a retailer is thinking about coming to your market, they're going to plot, and we're in the business of helping them do that, plot on a map where are all of their competitors and how many of them are there. Is there enough market for everybody? Probably not. So if there are less of those like-kind retailers in one place, they're going to gravitate there as to a place that has an overabundance of them. And then the retailer sales opportunity. Once again, they are in the business to make money, so they're looking at the bottom line. Can they do enough sales to create enough of an impact that it justifies the spending to actually build stores? There's almost no new retail store construction going on per our retail specialists that I reviewed the report with. And for the most part, retailers are moving into existing space and renovating it to cut back on the cost of construction. So as a result, the Mount Pleasant Center doesn't have buildings that would suit for that type of a renovation, so it makes it a very hard sell to find retail going to that site. So hotel convention center. You know, this one I would consider a bit of an outlier, right, for a city of your size, but it did come up with your Convention and Visitors Bureau, as well as with CMU a little bit on the hotel side, so we said we'll take a look at it. So I brought in, I happen to know the president of Aquest Realty Advisors in Metro Detroit. They built the H Hotel in Midland. They do hotel convention centers in mid-sized markets across the U.S. And so they have a pretty deep reputation in that. And so I sat with them and said, here's our site. This is our population, our demographics. You know, would this at all play for a hotel convention center, since there was some demand, a perception of demand at least, indicated from our stakeholder meetings. Their concern was that amenities are key to a hotel convention center. You need to be able to walk down the street to shopping. You need to be able to walk down the street to restaurants, and enough of them, so that if you draw a convention, everybody's got to have a place to eat. So you can't have a couple of places if you have even a mid-size convention center. So they felt like that was a negative based on what you have today. Now, to the extent that we're able to get some momentum at the site with some critical mass of different uses and restaurants and things of that sort, that might change the entire focus, and it would change their opinion of this. But as it is today, they felt like the lack of amenities would be significant and something that you really couldn't overcome compared to competing sites. Hotel convention centers, because convention centers bring a lot of people and they bring a lot of sales dollars to the general area. They don't necessarily cover a lot of cost for the building of the convention center itself. So there's a gap between the economic value of a convention center and the project cost. And that gap in financing is most often funded today by means of public-private partnerships, which may consist of your city floating a bond to help pay for the cost. by finding sufficient incentives that may exist, but oftentimes they're tied directly to the city as opposed to the developer. And so one of the things brought to my attention is that there really is a gap there that can't be overcome but for the involvement of the sponsoring entity, which in this case would be the city. Or they suggested if CMU thought it was important to have that, they could be the sponsoring entity. But at any rate, it tends to be a public entity that serves that sponsorship role that has to help with determining how you fill the gap between the cost and the economic opportunity. And then we looked at regional capacity. I know that getting in your car and going a long distance as opposed to going to Mount Pleasant Center may not seem to be the way you'd want to necessarily hit a convention center, but when I did a survey of the amount of convention center space you have here, I just want to pull that one out. And that also is in the full report. But basically, you have an ample supply, what we would deem an ample supply of convention space in the region. Now, the region here was all the way to Midland. And Midland has some facilities that you don't have. Midland is a larger city than yours. We didn't go as far as Saginaw, so we stayed generally within a 25-mile radius. And so between the casino space, the water park has convention center space. There are several independent convention centers, or what I would call, places where you can hold meetings, and most can hold 500 plus people. So these aren't like small rooms. And so there were, I would say, 6 or 7 or 8 areas where you could get that type of rooms within the region. And so, once again, as someone looks at whether they would come to your city or come to the Mount Pleasant Center for purposes of putting a hotel convention center, they're going to look at the competition, look at the number of conventions you're drawing today, and determine, is there sufficient supply that, with them coming into the market, that they could make sufficient money to make this worth their while. And, and there would be no proximity at that site to another convention center, because if you get into a more urban setting and you can get several hotels that are in close proximity or something of that sort, then you start to build on a larger convention population where everybody's within walking distance as opposed to needing to be able to drive to their destination. And then to get to a hotel convention center, to get absolute market demand calculated for you would require a specialized study. It was outside the scope of this analysis, but I feel like we spent enough time looking at the different variables to say that today it's not likely that it would fit at the Mount Pleasant Center. So, what is a regional food hub? Is anybody here familiar with that term? The USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, is very supportive of the development of regional food hubs across the United States. The Department of Agriculture for the state of Michigan is also very supportive. There are 5 food hubs in the state of Michigan today, and the largest being the market in Detroit, which is just thank you, Eastern Market. Since I live there, I can't believe I can't remember. Eastern Market is one of the largest and oldest food hubs. Now, when Eastern Market came along, nobody knew what the term food hub didn't mean anything, so they didn't know they were a food hub until they came up with this name and it fit. Eastern Market is 43 acres and has numerous opportunities for the aggregation and sale of food products that have nothing to do with a grocery store. So I'm just going to read to you the USDA's definition of a regional food hub. It's a business or organization that actively manages the aggregation, distribution, and marketing of source-identified food products, primarily from local and regional producers, to strengthen their ability to satisfy wholesale, retail, and institutional demand. You are dead center in the state. We did an analysis. There are 100 farmers within a 100-mile radius of Mount Pleasant that offer food and food-related products. So food related I'm calling like honey or other products that you would sell in that fashion. Now, what's important about this? I mean, really there's a means of, most people today want sustainable food practices. Most people today are interested in organic foods. And a lot of people are interested in getting it from their local food producers, meaning your farmers. So we believe that this is an area that you should take a serious look at. We believe it fits in the northern part of the property, not the southern part. And this is oftentimes a 24/7 operation, and sometimes it's just during the day. Sometimes it has retail sales, and sometimes it is wholesale only. It has many definitions, but really it is a means of helping farmers today who have product that they either don't know how to get to the market, or they could expand their farms if they had some assistance with their farming techniques and technology, and someone to help them get the food from one place to another. So why does this matter? Once again, living in Metro Detroit, I go to the farmers market every single Saturday in season, and that's where I buy all of my produce for the week, and a lot of us like to do that. Well, those farmers are coming from this area to where I live in Farmington Hills. There are no farmers around Farmington Hills, right? Notwithstanding the name. But basically, this is allowing farmers who today are either trucking to one farmers market or serving a limited number of restaurants with organic or specialty foods that are grown in Michigan, and allowing them to come to a central location like you might have and put their product with 20 other farmers that all go on the same truck out to this market. So they get a lot more marketability of their foods across a much broader spectrum. And once again, another area of concentration here is bringing technology to allow farmers to improve, herbicides, no herbicides, exactly, what is organic farming, how can they improve their farming so that their product is acceptable to restaurants who want to buy this type of product but can't necessarily find enough of it. So, so we think it's something to study. Now, I did interview a gentleman, and I put this is the last 3 pages in your package. I gave you the portions of the Food Hub study. So Ted Spritzer from Market Ventures, Inc. is based in Portland, Maine. He is the consultant for the Grand Rapids Food Hub, and he is the consultant for Traverse City. Traverse City was granted $50,000 by the state of Michigan to study food hubs in November. I met with the folks from Traverse City. They're not quite sure whether they're going forward because they're not sure that their facilities meet the need. This is a facility-intensive use. You have to have cold storage. You have to have technology. But there are funds out there from the USDA that make some of this funding possible. Ted talked to me about, he knows Michigan pretty well now, having done Grand Rapids and having worked on Traverse City. So clearly he'd be happy to come from Portland and meet with you as well. But he had some recommendations. He believes that food hubs need to be for-profit ventures and not nonprofit. He said these are very sophisticated operations and really require someone who's in it as a business. And he feels that that is a better way to do, and then to do it necessarily as a co-op where a bunch of farmers get together and try to make it work. He feels like you need an operator who actually runs it in a for-profit way. When we looked at the 5 businesses in Michigan, you have a whole mixture of nonprofit and for-profit groups. Some would share with us their revenues and others would not. When we looked at food hubs across the U.S., they run the gamut. Charlottesville, Virginia has a very large one. Portland, Oregon has large ones. There are quite a few examples out there where you don't have to reinvent the wheel to understand where this may or may not fit within Mount Pleasant. He said sustained success is really important, and one of the ways to get that is to have an institutional commitment. So for instance, in Traverse City, if they go forward with it, and I met with them a couple of months ago, so I don't know whether they've made a final decision. I haven't seen it in the press. But Traverse City Public Schools have agreed to have a certain percentage of all of their lunches that they provide to children come from the food hub if the food hub goes forward. So we were thinking Central Michigan University, for sure, would probably very much be interested in having a percentage of their food that they serve to their students come from local farmers. And so that might be a means of getting quite a large institutional sponsor, if you will, that helps the economics automatically go. We also think the Mount Pleasant school system, if Traverse City school system can do it, maybe Mount Pleasant school system would like to look at it as well. So where are the opportunities? Would the healthcare systems look at it? I know in West Bloomfield, Michigan, not too far from where I live, the hospital system there, the Henry Ford that is out in the suburbs, they do a lot of organic food. And there are a lot of people who go and eat their dinner there and buy it because the food is really good and they have nothing, they're not there to see a doctor. So it has a lot of benefits. So maybe McLaren or Mid-Michigan might be opportunistic about taking a look at this because healthcare systems are all about wellness now. And so could this be a way that you could tackle this and take a look at it? The leading food hub group in Michigan is called the Michigan Food Hub Network. You're welcome to look that up. They have a website. It is run by Rick Pirog, P-I-R-O-G, who is Senior Associate Director of the Michigan State University Center for Regional Food Systems. My researcher called him, and he was ready to get in the car and come and meet with you guys, and I told him we hadn't really told you about it yet, so it'd probably be a little premature for him to give you a call. So he agreed to hold off. But he was very excited about the potential of you taking a look at this use. But he is actually running a regional food hub network, and the 5 food hubs in Michigan all belong to it, and those that are looking at it are belonging to it as well. So there is an organization within the state of Michigan that is promoting this. The cost of a study, Mr. Spritzer said, is somewhere between $40,000 and $90,000. The one he did for Traverse City, at least per what was in Crane's Detroit Businesses, was $50,000, and once again was paid for by the state of Michigan Department of Agriculture. So hopefully if you choose to go down this path, you can both find funding to take a serious look from a feasibility standpoint that wouldn't cost you a lot of dollars to take a look at it. Mr. Spritzer would come here for a much reduced fee just to have an initial conversation with you if you're interested. Housing. Well, okay, this is going on a tape. So I'm of the age where senior living sounds interesting to me. So I just put that on tape. I may regret that later, maybe. But basically, independent living, and this would not be the senior housing necessarily of the lady who was speaking earlier, because this is not assisted living and this is not nursing home that we're speaking of. What came out of the stakeholder meeting was an interest in seeing whether retirees who are able to live on their own, if there was apartment housing that would be attractive to them as retirees. And what first comes to mind with all those commercials is the villages of somewhere in Florida. And so we said, well, we'll take a look at it. If it looks like there's real demand, we'd certainly want to identify that and figure out if that's something that would go with the Mount Pleasant Center. Well, we did some research, and frankly, what we found is that most seniors do not want to move out of their homes at all. Most of them do not want to move into an apartment. Now, there's always exceptions, but most do not. And the age of seniors who move out of their home is typically 75 years old or greater. It is not 65. It is not 60. So for the statistics tell us, and this is based on the National Institute of Seniors, I think it's called, let me see, National Investment for Seniors Housing and Care Industry is where we got our stats. So basically, 75-year-olds are the baseline for moving out of your homes. Most people prefer to stay in their homes was the bottom line. Now, of those that are 75, about 20% elect to live in senior housing of some sort. So 80% elect to stay in their homes. So that 20% is a combination of independent living, which means you you have an active lifestyle and no need for assistance at all, or assisted living, where you're somewhere between independent and nursing, and so you need some level of assistance, but you're still pretty mobile, or skilled nursing, where obviously it's a more advanced stage of life. Those three combined make up about 20% of those seniors that are 75 and older. So of those 20% that elect to go into senior housing and leave their homes, only 4.8% decide they want to go into independent living. The rest of them are moving into assisted living or nursing home. Now, it's not really surprising because at 75, you might need a little bit of assistance, and so therefore, independent living wouldn't necessarily meet your needs. So the statistics match pretty much with the age, I believe. And then independent living and, frankly, assisted living and skilled nursing living are quite expensive. We have a group that takes a look at this for developers, and they ran the calculations for me and said, you really need at least $50,000 a year to be income qualified for independent living. About 35 to 36,000 of that is the unit itself, and then there's everything else. If you're independent living, you typically still have a car. You still have expenses of food and clothing and entertainment and all those other things. So they felt like you needed to have $50,000 a year to move into independent living. So we took that information and we took it to Mount Pleasant, and I'll pull my statistics here so we can talk through how that translates into your community. So we looked at that, and based on your population, you have a total population within the city over 75 or older. I want to get this right. So we took within the city of all households, that's the income. I don't see an aggregated number here. You have a total of 247 people that are 75 or older that would be income qualified, that fit into the $50,000 a year ability to afford independent living. So there's 247 income qualified households. Now that may mean that they go to independent living or assisted living or skilled nursing. So that whole 247 isn't just for independent living. That's just the number of seniors 75 and above that can afford $50,000 a year for housing in an apartment. When you break that down and you take it down to the 4.8%, you take 20% and then you take the 4.8%, you really get a very small population, of a dozen people in your city proper who fit that qualification. When we moved to we did a 25-mile radius as well and said, certainly a developer wouldn't look at your city only. They would look at a wider area. So we went 25 miles out and said, okay, could we get enough population that fit the 75 years and greater with $50,000 a year available in income qualification? Could we get enough numbers that we could attract a developer for independent living? And when we went to that group, at the 25-mile radius, there were 816 qualified of some form of senior living at 75 and greater. And let's see, it turned out that, look at my cheat sheet here, there would be less than 40 based on taking the percentages of the percentages that would choose independent living. So there just wasn't enough total population within the income qualification required for somebody to come in and necessarily build the housing for independent living. It may be totally different than what your thought is or your perception is about whether recent retirees want to move to apartments. I can just tell you what the statistics are telling us, and when we look at this across the United States and we look at how others are looking at it, we applied those same metrics to Mount Pleasant and within a 25-mile radius to reach these conclusions. So then the second area of housing that we looked at was medical student apartments. Because the medical school is new and exciting and one of the biggest changes to your community. One of the perceptions from the stakeholders meeting was that perhaps medical students, in some cases, might be a little bit older than your average student, and those students may also have a spouse that has is in a profession that would allow them to live in apartment housing that would be more expensive, but not expensive, but more expensive than regular student housing. So we took a look at that, and we said, that sounds like something we should look at. The medical school's coming on. Now, the medical school is going to have limited population. At the max, it's going to have 120 students in any 1 year. And when those students get to residency, they're going to do that residency in Saginaw, which has something to do with where their housing selection might be. Also, we knew that CMU was building a graduate housing complex for 94 apartments, but clearly with the amount of graduate students that CMU has, those apartments are not dedicated to medical students only. They're open to all graduate students, and as a result, there would be quite a demand for those because they're quite nice apartments, they're very new style, and have a lot of amenities that traditional student housing doesn't have. So we thought, well, there's 94, but there's 5,000 graduate students, I believe, at CMU, so there's lots of people who would like that. So we took a look, we interviewed quite a few, I think 6 or 8, maybe 10 regional and national housing developers of student housing, and we interviewed them about what was going on at CMU's medical school and the number of students, and we put to them whether they would be willing or interested in talking about building an apartment complex that's directed at maybe a little bit older graduate student that maybe has a spouse that has a viable income that could afford it, and they were universal in the fact that they said no. They said medical students, even if their wife has enough money, they will still go for the less expensive apartment. They will still go closer to campus. They'd rather bike to their classes than get in a car and drive. And so they did not believe there was any viability for building any apartments that would be suitable for medical or graduate students on the Mount Pleasant Center site. Since then, on February 20th, Union Township Planning Commission approved two developments that night, and previously one other development. So you have approximately 1,500 students worth of new housing coming into CMU on the Union Township side over the next 18 months. They are going to have tremendous amenities. I spoke to the developer of one of them. I spoke to a developer of two of them, not the third. They will have pools, they will have tennis courts, they will have community rooms, they will have apartments with granite countertops, and maybe places we'd all like to move. I don't know. But it sounded like that the graduate students, whether they're medical student or otherwise, will have some choices. Now, there's probably going to be a lot of competition for those new units, but there's been a change over the last 10 years in student housing with much upgrading across the board, and this is just a further extension of that. So there's quite a bit of new housing coming on board, so we don't think that there's really demand on the Mount Pleasant Center site to accommodate that. So then we looked at professionals' apartments, and I really will wind this up soon because I know everybody's getting tired. So in a couple of the stakeholders meetings, there was a comment about the fact that you have professionals that don't necessarily want to own homes and would like a higher quality apartment because of your significant presence of student housing. Oftentimes, your professionals have really no choice but to enter apartments that are geared more to students than to professionals because that's what's available in your housing stock. So we looked at mid to high income to say, could we have a differentiator, and would there be sufficient population for that to be a use at the Mount Pleasant Center? And we went through the PRISM segmentation that I mentioned, where we looked at all the types of households that are broken into categories. And one of the areas that they focus on is income, with or without kids, education, and do they want to be homeowners or renters. So we had a lot of data available to us to take your population and say, we can pull from that who wants to be a renter within the mid to high income level with and without kids. And not having kids or having kids was necessarily something that made a difference. You simply didn't have the population to do it. We looked at the greater 4-county area where we had surveyed on the retail, and there was still insufficient population that met that criteria that we thought we could pull a developer and entice them to build that type of housing, apartment housing on the Mount Pleasant Center. So the last area we looked at was single-family housing. And once again, we took a high-level look at that. And I think the demographics that we have been through really tell the story. You're rolling about 10% of your housing every year. So the housing stock is available. Is it the exact housing stock that everybody wants? I guess that's yet to be determined. But when we looked at, you have such limited population growth, you lost a lot of household units over the last 10 years, and you have very limited household growth coming up, that it would be, and your housing starts suggest within 2012 you had 3 permits for single-family homes, doesn't suggest that there's a huge demand out there for people who want to build new homes. And we know from talking to your planning department that indeed you do have lots for single-family homes available that have not yet been tapped. So could you ever have single-family housing at Mount Pleasant Center? Very possibly. But today, from a pure critical mass standpoint, do you have a driving demand that would send a residential developer to the table to put in roads and bring the sewer to it and utilities and everything else? Probably not today. I think it's something to keep on the radar, but I don't think that it's something that we would find a developer today who would say, yes, I'd come and take that risk. So what did we learn with all this talking? We learned that for a medical office, I think if you end up with a healthcare user, McLaren, Mid-Michigan, or something of that sort on Mount Pleasant Center, they're definitely going to have some medical office space. It will gravitate to wherever they are. So you'll have opportunities for that if one of those healthcare providers decides to put something on the site. That is the institutional, which is number 2. We think there is demand. The demand's not quantified, and it's something that requires further exploration by the city. Traditional retail, could not find demand for that at that location. Hotel Convention Center, the same. The regional food hub, we have a question mark. I'm sorry you can't see that very well in the yellow. We think that's something you should definitely study. We think you're well positioned. We think there's lots of farmers around. This would not be for the faint of heart. This is, but I know in working with your administration that they're willing to take on challenges. So, you know, they're very pragmatic, but yet very positive. So I really feel like that's something that's worth exploring. Single-family medical housing, which is the students, professional housing, senior housing, none of those could we find demand for today or in the next 5 years. And once again, we did not look at assisted living and nursing care. I will tell you, though, that in Union Township, there are 2 new assisted living complexes coming up. And I did talk to both of the developers of those assisted living complexes. They do not have sufficient demand today to build out everything they're approved for, which would suggest, and one or the other, I'm not sure which, may not have known that one or the other was going in at the same time. So one or the other may have found a surprise. But anyway, so maybe you wouldn't have both going on had they both known the other one was there. Maybe so, maybe not. But so right now, they have quite a few units approved for which they're going to add on the buildings as the demand grows. So it would suggest that another complex beyond the 2 that are or one's under construction, almost finished. I guess both of them will open in the next few weeks or the next few months. So anyway, it's worth taking a look at what's already there and determining whether there's some more demand for assisted living. But as you saw, the numbers I was going through for the population included all forms of senior living as far as the total population available. And industrial, we haven't talked about industrial, but industrial was excluded from the study altogether at the start. You have a large industrial park today. It has ample space. and it was deemed that while you will probably see some increase in industrial use over the next 5 years, that there wasn't a tremendous desire to see industrial go on the Mount Pleasant Center site, given its proximity to its other uses, and that you had ample opportunity to meet that need in other parts of the city. So in concluding, I think I've said it. I think you should look at the regional food hub, get some dollars that are available through state and federal funding to help you with that. See if that's an area of real growth for the city. It could be very unique, and you're just very well positioned right in the middle of the state to, if that's going to take off, and it is in many parts of the country, you know, there's no reason you shouldn't be a part of that. The institutional corporate, you know, an anchor on the Mount Pleasant Center site is really, really important to getting a critical mass, because once you get an anchor, there's lots of other ancillary and complementary uses that will follow that. But short of having an anchor, something of a critical mass that others can say, yes, I'll put a restaurant there because I know there's 700 employees or 500 employees or some critical mass of employees in a particular location, it's hard for any of the ancillary uses to justify going out there at all, for all the obvious reasons. So anyway, that's our report, and we thank you for your time.